Why the Buddha hated interdependence, the harsh truth of suffering. There's a passage where the Buddha says that if you want to master jhana and get really good at right concentration, you need both tranquility and insight. In other words, you don't just force the mind down. If you want the mind to be willing to settle down, you have to understand its causes and effects, what works, what doesn't work, remembering that the insights you use don't necessarily have to be verbalized. After all, think about it. Insight has to do with value judgments. What's worth doing, what's not worth doing, what gets good results, what doesn't get good results. Sometimes you know these things without having to verbalize too much. When you're cooking food, you know when something is done. If something is not quite right with the sauce or with whatever you're making, you have an idea of what needs to be done. And some of that's not very verbalized. When you taste it and it's just right, that's all you need to know. Just right. You're done. You're ready. This is one of the reasons why Ajahn Lee often talks about meditation as being like a manual skill. The knowledge of a manual skill is often very unverbalized. When you're planning some wood, for example, your sense of what's just right, the right amount of pressure to put on the plane as you run it along, how deeply to cut, is not necessarily verbalized. You have a sense of what feels right. Well, it's the same with settling the mind. Get a sense of what kind of breath feels right for settling the mind, where you want it focused, how broad you want your focus to be. Some people will verbalize this more than others, but the important thing is the skill. And remember, it took a Buddha to come up with the vocabulary that we use for our meditation. There have been a lot of people who gain full awakening, like the private Buddhas, who couldn't formulate the Dhamma. They sensed their way into awakening, recognized it when it came, but couldn't put it into words. Or you can look at the different forest ajahns. Some of them are people of very few words who don't explain much. Others are very articulate. But just because someone is articulate doesn't mean that his or her knowledge is better than someone who's not articulate. After all, freedom is not a matter of words. It comes from seeing things that you're doing for the sake of happiness, realizing that they're not getting the results you want, and thinking of other things you might do instead. That kind of value judgment is not necessarily verbalized, but it is discernment. But just because someone is articulate doesn't mean that his or her knowledge is better than someone who's not articulate. After all, freedom is not a matter of words. It comes from seeing things that you're doing for the sake of happiness, realizing that they're not getting the results you want, and thinking of other things you might do instead. That kind of value judgment is not necessarily verbalized, but it is discernment. As you work with the mind, try to get a sense of it. How much pressure you can put on it. How much pressure you put on the breath so that you can stay with the breath, but you don't force the breath too much. If the pressure isn't right, the mind won't settle down. If there's too much pressure on the breath, you feel confined. If there's too little, you float away. So how can you stay with the breath consistently? And how can you keep the mind happy to be there consistently? The mind likes a lot of variety, and you have to train it to like being here in a very quiet place. So you have to develop a skill, the skill of being quiet and being happy to be quiet. You can play around with the breath, but then as the breath gets more and more subtle, there comes a point where if you really want to get the mind to settle down, you have to stop playing and just be with an all-around sense of the body, very much one with the breath. Fortunately, the breath gives you a reward when you do that. A strong sense of pleasure goes along with that. Some people even sense it as rapture. At the very least, it's refreshment, but then that too begins to seem gross and falls away. You have to keep training the mind. This is a good place to stay. It's good to stay here. Why do you want to go anyplace else? Why are you looking for trouble? Learn how to appreciate a concentrated mind. Have respect for concentration. You tell yourself that you want well-being, yet when it comes, you get bored. Ask yourself, what's wrong with the well-being? It will, of course, have its drawbacks. After all, concentration is not perfect, but to get beyond it, you have to know it well, to sense its slight ups and downs. Here again, it's not so much an issue of verbalizing. Just notice, when does the stress go up? When does it go down? When it goes up, what did you do? What perception came? What feeling came in? When the stress level goes down, what perception did you let go of? Those are things that you feel your way into. As Ajahn Mahabua points out, when you see something that's not worth holding on to, it doesn't matter whether you tell yourself it's inconstant, stressful, or not self, or don't say any of those things. You just have a sense, this isn't worth it, and you let go. That's where the real discernment lies. The terms, the perceptions, are simply aids to help convince you that this is something you really don't want to go with, no matter how much you've liked it in the past. But if for whatever other reason you notice that it's just not worth it and you let go, that counts as discernment too. Part of our problem is that we understand knowledge as having to be in words. This is reflected in the history of Western philosophy. Philosophers very quickly get into questions of what they call epistemology, the study of how we know things. And the basic paradigm for this approach is how we look at things, realizing that we formulate a lot of assumptions about them in order to deal with them. After all, your visual field is your most active sensory field. There's a lot of verbalization that goes on simply in trying to figure out if you see something. Is it true or is it not true? Is it a mirage? How do you test? Whereas in Indian thought, especially prior to the Buddha, the basic paradigm was not the act of looking at something, it was the act of eating. This, they said, was the basic function of a human being, of any being, eating. The Buddha himself said that this was what we all have in common. All beings need to feed. When you're eating something, it's not a question of whether that thing exists or not. The fact that it's filling you up, that's fulfilling a function. The questions, is it healthy for you? And will it be good for you in the long term? Those are a different series of questions, and questions like that don't have to be verbalized so much. Part of the issue revolves around whether the food tastes good or doesn't taste good. Even if you don't verbalize it beyond saying, this is horrible, you spit it out. With other things, you have to be more careful. Something may taste good, but it may not be good for you. That's a whole different set of questions. But remember, a lot of eating is non-verbal, and yet a great deal of discernment goes into what you should and should not eat. What this gets down to is what the Romans called the difference between scribe knowledge and warrior knowledge. Scribe knowledge had to be expressed in words. It was a matter of definitions. Warrior knowledge was simply a matter of knowing your skills, knowing your weapon, knowing your enemy. And as you know a weapon, know an enemy, or know your horse or your other aids as you fight. Sometimes you have a sense that your horse needs to rest. Well, how do you say that to yourself? You just know. Sometimes you get a sense of how to use your weapons. You get a sense of what your opponent is like. Often this sense is not verbalized, but it counts as knowledge. Even if the only war that you're engaged in is doing battle with food in the kitchen, it's the same sort of thing. You get a piece of food. What do you do with it? How does it need to be prepared until it's done? When it's done, how do you know it's done? You have a sense. It's the same with the mind. Have a sense of when it's ready to settle down. Have a sense of when it's beginning to get unsettled. That kind of knowledge deals with cause and effect. Which causes are worth going with, which ones are not, based on the effects. That's where the insight lies. Interdependence and death. When the Buddha taught the principle of the interconnectedness among beings to young novices, he used the image of feeding. All living beings, he said, subsist on food. It's not a pretty image, because there's suffering on both sides. Of course, those who are being fed on are suffering, but those who have to feed suffer as well. When you're in a position where you need to feed, it's very precarious. The Buddha never celebrated the principle of interconnectedness because it's all tied up in suffering, pain. That reflection is one of the reflections we employ in order to motivate ourselves to practice, to get out of all this. Just think about how much our lives depend on things that are totally beyond our control. The pandemic and all the social unrest going on really underscore the point that things could change just a little bit. It wouldn't take much, and a lot of society would come crashing down. We'd find ourselves deprived of many of the things that we take for granted. Now you could think about this in a way that gets you depressed, but that's not the point. The point is that even without pandemics and even without social unrest, there's still aging, illness, and death. These things can happen at any time. The question always is, are you ready to go? When the Buddha talks about being in the present moment, it's not to celebrate the present moment. It's because that's where work has to be done. You know you have this present moment. As for tomorrow, or an hour from now, or even 2 minutes from now, you don't really know, but you do have this breath. So what can you do with this breath besides just keeping yourself alive? It's good to stop and take stock. If you were to die, what would you have to take with you? You can't take the body. You can't take your relationships. You can't take your material possessions. You take the qualities you build into the mind. So what qualities do you have? Are they the qualities that would try to grasp onto things here before you go? If they are, they're going to weigh you down. You have to learn to think in ways that can cut all those ties, shave all the hooks off the Velcro, and focus more inwardly at your awareness. That's what you want to work on. But it's good to have some values that remind you of why this is important, like those pair of chants we had just now. First, the world is swept away. It does not endure. We're a slave to craving. There is no shelter. And then, may I be happy. It sounds like a hopeless hope, but it's not hopeless. That's the whole point of this type of contemplation. There is a sense of well-being that can be developed in the mind that's independent of the life of the body. That's the Buddha's message. Have you found that yet? What do you need to do to find it? As the Buddha said, when you think about death, the purpose is to motivate you to find the deathless. And where is it going to be found? By working here in the present moment. There are lots of ways you can think to remind yourself that this is an important place to be, because there's work to be done. And the most important work you can do is the work you can do right now, right here. Years back, a woman came to Wat Dhammasatthit. She was going to spend 2 weeks meditating. The second day she was there, she came to say goodbye. She was going to go home, and Ajahn Fuang asked her why. She said, "I keep thinking of the people at home, what they're going to do, who's going to look after them." He said, "Tell yourself that you've already died. They're going to have to look after themselves." So she did, and she was able to make it through the 2 weeks. I've always found that an effective way of thinking about death, you're already dead. You just happen to be hanging around, seeing what's left over afterwards. It gives you some distance from a lot of things. You realize that once you die, you can't change that. You can't change this. You've just got to leave the world as it is, with all its loose ends. The world is full of loose ends. It's not the nature of the world that it's ever going to reach closure. There will come a time that when no matter how much you want to talk to somebody or say something or get a message to them, you can't. One thing this contemplation does is to remind you that if there's something really important you want to say to somebody else, especially things that are good, things that are useful, say it now. Don't let it go left unsaid. Then turn around and look at your mind. If it starts wondering about next week's work or tomorrow's work, just tell yourself, okay, suppose I were already dead. It wouldn't matter. What would matter at that point? The qualities you build into the mind, or the qualities that strengthen the mind's good side and also allow you to abandon the things that would keep you tied down. Another way of contemplating death is to remind yourself that once you leave this body you've got here, you're not going to want it. Ajahn Fuang made a comment one time when he was teaching in Wat Makut. It was a funeral monastery, and on Saturday evenings he tended not to have many people come. The people who came on Saturdays tended to come during the day, so in the evenings he might go walking around the monastery a little bit to stretch his legs. One evening he came back and said, "You know, the number of people who die and hang around their bodies is awfully high." I could only imagine what he saw as he was walking past what he would call the body shops. They'd have these pavilions, about 20 pavilions altogether, where they'd have a coffin and a place where people would sit, and a place where monks would sit for the ceremonies. He had a student one time who was sitting in meditating, and she had a vision. Behind the building where Ajahn Fuang taught, he was up on the second story of the building. There was a little field of what they called envelopes, concrete block structures, each just big enough to stick a coffin in. In Thailand, when somebody dies, they ordinarily don't have the funeral right away, especially not in central Thailand. They wait until the family's ready. In the meantime, they have to keep the body someplace, so they have these envelopes. The ones behind Wat Makut were all lined up, 4 or 5 lines. In the vision, she saw a ceremony where a coffin was being placed in one of the envelopes, and there was a man standing at the entrance to the envelope, wearing a grey suit. As the people were leaving after the ceremony, he looked left, right, and went shoot into the envelope. It startled her. She left meditation and looked out the window, and sure enough, this ceremony had just taken place. So she went down and asked the people who were leaving, the person who died, did he look like this? She described the man in the suit, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's him." So she went back up and asked Ajahn Fuang, "What do I do now?" He told her, "See if you can get that vision in your meditation again, and then look inside the envelope." She did, and there in the envelope was the man, squatting next to his body, looking lost. Ajahn Fuang told her, "Okay, Now dedicate the merit of your meditation to him." And she did. She said it was like a headlight from a car going out from her chest. The man looked up at her, looked startled, and then there was kind of a light of recognition. He vanished. So part of preparing yourself to die is to remind yourself you don't want to hang around here. Think of the good that you've done, and then follow that, because otherwise you end up just wandering around fixated and not really knowing where to go or what to do. There is a skill to dying. There's a passage where the Buddha's leaving after having spent the rains retreat, and one of his cousins comes and asks, "When you're gone and somebody's dying, what do I do?" And the Buddha gave recommendations for the advice to give. And it's good advice to give yourself. First, whatever you're worried about, in terms of the work you've left behind, or the people you're leaving behind, remind yourself, okay, I can't think about those people at all right now. If you've had practice in meditating, that's one of the things you've been learning how to do. Not think about the people around you, not think about the people in your life. Think only about your breath. There are some people who say, well, you wouldn't have any breath at that point. But when you're working with the breath, it's not just the breath you're working with. When the Buddha talks about working with the 16 steps of breath meditation, he's also talking about mental fabrication, and the instructions themselves are in the form of verbal fabrication. The purpose of this focus on fabrications is to get you sensitive to the way you shape your mind through your perceptions and feelings. That's what's going to hold you in good stead when there's no more breath to watch. If you can perceive that the affairs of the world are behind you now, that'll be a good perception to hold in mind. Then the next is, are you concerned about leaving the pleasures of the human world? Well, there are better pleasures in the Deva worlds. The Buddha recommends describing one level and then the next higher level, and then the next, and the pleasures get better and better. So you can remind yourself, there's a lot better than the human realm. Don't hang around here. But then you remind yourself further that even in the highest levels of the heaven, people are still stuck on self-identity, identifying themselves around the aggregates. See if you can let go of that. At the same time, there's another perception that goes along with this, seeing the undesirability of any world. So, if you catch yourself identifying with your thoughts or your perceptions, try to be very careful about which perceptions you hold on to, like the perceptions that tell you that you don't want to create a sense of identity and you don't want to inhabit any of the worlds that can appear to you. In other words, you don't want to get involved in becoming, because that's what becoming is, an identity in a particular world. You've seen them all in principle. They all start and they end, and no matter how wonderful they may be, there's nothing left when they're gone. We like to think that we have good memories of the good things we've done or experienced, but memories begin to fade and they get confused. Then you have nothing left. Ajahn Suwat would ask, those sensual pleasures you had last week, where are they now? Well, the same principle holds for no matter how good the sensual pleasures are in the heavenly realms. There's nothing left except for the karma that got you there. And when that runs out, what do you have left then? We tend to think that we gain something by creating new states of becoming, but each one crumbles like dust. You're better off if you can find something that doesn't require a state of becoming, doesn't require an identity, and is not a world, something that's not fabricated. Try to incline your mind in that direction. If you're going to hold on to a perception, that's a good one to hold on to. as you can see, dying well is something you have to practice. And this is what the meditation's for. Even if you're not consciously thinking about contemplation of death, the fact that you're trying to get the mind settled with the breath, using the proper perceptions, the proper ways of talking to yourself, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, putting aside any reference to who you think you are, and just looking at the problem of suffering and what's causing it. All of this is preparing you to die well. When you learn how to think in impersonal terms like this, it's really going to be helpful at the time of death, because we take death so personally. All the things that I've done in my life are all going to go away, and where am I going to go now? It's just I. But if you learn to relate to your own mind, relate to what's going on here in the meditation, in impersonal terms, then you can bring the same perspective to the process of dying. It goes a lot more smoothly, a lot more skillfully. As the Buddha said, if you really do it right, it's possible to gain release as you use that perception of not wanting to identify with any of the aggregates that come up, along with the perception of the undesirability of any world. The question is, what will you have left? Ajahn Lee's answer is, you won't need to have anything left. That's where you're going to find Nibbana. So it's in this way that contemplation of death leads to the deathless. It's just a question of doing it right.